Episode 4, Key Issue, the definitive podcast, brought to you by Covrprice, with Covrprice. It's not biased, brought to you by Definitive. But we're working with our good friends at Covrprice, coverprice.com. I'm Randall Lobb from Definitive Film.
I'm Isaac Elliott Fisher from Definitive Film.
Who's that other guy?
I'm Ryan Buckley from my basement.
Ryan's been doing some cosplay for us. At some point in this episode, he might do it by surprise.
Totally surprised.
Listen, the story in your basement is it's the danger room. Do you want to just show the people at home what you've done with your beautiful background? Look at that.
Whoa. Mm-hmm. He's in a room. It looks like Tron.
It's maybe
some weird things happening if I move quickly.
Very disturbing. Very disturbing. We are in the second part of our look at the X-Men, our look and our listen. We're talking about the X-Men after they came back, after there was a shortage of X-Men activity between 67 and 93. There was a big hole. If you were an X-Men collector, you were disappointed, weren't you, Ryan?
I wasn't born.
I was going to say.
I'm sorry. You weren't there for that?
Yeah.
So it was a very disappointing time in my life.
Only you were there.
I was there as an old guy. I also wasn't collecting the X-Men at that time. But I will say this, had I been collecting, I would have been disappointed by the reprints. But something happened in 1975, early in the year in 1975. I believe it came out in February 1975, had a May 1975 date on it. And it was super important because X-Men had very low, terrible sales for many years. And I looked at a little bit about why. So I'm just going to hit you guys with a couple things. Have you ever heard of the direct market for comics?
This is a neat hand sign for the direct market.
This is the symbol for the direct market. The new distro system that encouraged specialty shops that came out, people used to go to just random newsstands and grab comic books. In the early into the mid-70s, the way that you got comics was changing. And one of those key changes was, if you're in a comic store, you didn't rip the covers off and send them back to the publisher like you do with magazines. So comics started to take on a little bit more of a collector's market because they had back issues. So people who sold comics in a sort of a specific comic retail setting, a comic store, they would keep back issues because they couldn't get credits for them, but they spent less per issue. So that impacted the sales of comics. People used to just walk in and drop some money and buy whack of comics. Things were changing. You had the same thing that was happening in Hollywood was happening with comics. If you guys know about 70s movies, there was an influx of new talent. Late 60s into the early 70s, you had these people who were making movies who had a different approach. The Vietnam War was ending in 1975. You had people who were coming out of the counterculture into Marvel and DC, and they were doing things differently. Now, this is specifically for both of you. I'm going to give you a list of characters that came out in these early 70s. Swamp Thing, Big Barda, John Stewart, who was a Green Lightning, African-American, Black Green Lightning, Luke Cage, Ghost Rider, Shang-Chi, and Iron Fist. Iron Fist, of course, a whitewashed Asian-style character, but Shang-Chi, a legitimate Asian character. Punisher, and Wolverine. This is in the early to mid-70s. Interesting characters. Now, Isaac, at the time, you weren't born. Ryan was born after all this. Do any of those characters seem resonant to you when I make that list?
Oh, yeah. I mean, a couple of them right off the top. I mean, Swamp Thing, I think, is one of the ones that hits me right away. Mm-hmm. I love the underground stuff that was going on that actually carried over into like the 80s and 90s that turned into cartoons and stuff, and they were kind of grasping at silly franchises to try to make them into something. Actually, I should look this up, but I'm not sure. Did they attempt at Swamp Thing cartoon before they did the X-Men cartoon? Was that something that happened?
I'm not a cartoon guy, but I can tell you that Swamp Thing would not have been one of the most obvious things to turn into a cartoon because it was an early horror
really?
And it was quite dark, but it had a social active element. It was social activism around environmental concerns. And if you look at some of these characters, obviously John Stewart and Luke Cage are Black characters. Mm-hmm. And those sorts of titles, you have young people coming in and writing comics and saying, you know what, comics are fine to sell to American kids, but if we can sell them to American kids, British kids, Asian kids, and, pick China, Japan, whatever, pick countries, South America, they started to expand the countries they were looking at. And they also looked at the American audiences and said, why wouldn't black kids buy comics? Maybe black kids want to see themselves in comics. Maybe Asian kids who are in America and North America want to see themselves in comics. Why don't we expand sort of the palette for characters?
And what about some of the other characters you mentioned? Well, obviously some of the more well-known ones like Wolverine and Punisher. Those are Wolverine maybe less so than Punisher, but kind of anti-hero, gritty characters. Is this also reflecting of the time?
I was going to say that too. The comics code is fading in its power. There was a Spider-Man title that came out that dealt with drug abuse or drug use, I guess, and it didn't get the comics code. So you see the things that were happening in other culture. So movies and books were being a little more hard-edged. It was bleeding over into comics. Even though comics were for kids and they were aiming for kids, they were widening the palette for the type of audience. And also you have a more distinct college audience too, right? Kids who grew up in the 60s are now older and maybe they're buying comics, and there's a certain audience that comes to comics and says, I like the art, I like some of these new creators, I want in too. And we know that Conan the Barbarian and some of the titles that were a little more influenced by literature, or let's say influenced by certain other elements of culture, science fiction and fantasy and so on, those were perhaps bringing older audiences in. So let's jump into what was happening to lead up to that first X-Men. You have an editor named Len Wein, Len Wein, let's pronounce it, W-E-I-N. Len was editing and writing in Marvel, and he's a young guy. He was best friends with Marv Wolfman, and he and Marv were doing a lot of things that were interesting. And Dave Cockrum had been at DC, and Dave Cockrum, who came over from Legion of Superheroes, he was known for his work with character and costume designs. And what we have here is a Gil Kane cover that incorporates some of the material that Dave Cockrum brought over. Now, Gil Kane, everybody knows Gil is pretty well regarded for his DC work and particularly for Batman, but he's done everything over his career. You could do a whole episode on Gil. But you have Storm, you have Wolverine, you have Scott Summers, the Cyclops, you have Peter Rasputin, Colossus, you have Mr. Proudstar down here, John Proudstar, Thunderbird, and there's Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, and there's the old X-Men, and how he gets doubled we don't have to talk about. But the idea is these designs, these characters, when they came out, they were revolutionary in a way because, Aurora is from Africa, Storm. Wolverine is from Canada. Peter is from Russia. John Proudstar is from the American Southwest. I believe he was Apache. And Kurt is from Germany. And so you have this international cast, and they're bursting out. Dave Cockrum's costume designs are very appealing, very interesting. And you have a real sense of something new. Ryan, do you have Giant Size X-Men 1?
No, I wish I did.
Tell him why he doesn't, Isaac, before he goes on.
This specific issue, I wonder if it's important because it has a really big price on it. We're talking record price here, highest known value at 9.8. April 30th, 2020 was a $14,400 sale. So yeah, an average 7.5 grading at $13.92. So yeah, this is a key issue. Rand, I guess you kind of covered this, but this is the first book in a long time. Is that correct? Is this the first X-Men book coming out at the middle of this lull?
They were going to put out Giant Size X-Men for a while. It was going to be a quarterly, and they would put out these giant size, and then they would see how it went. We know how it went. Ryan, sorry, I cut you off when I talked about the value.
Cool.
What were you going to say there?
No, I was just going to say, just because it's the first appearance of so many iconic characters, it's like a comic book that anybody would want to have, especially these characters that resonate and have been in our imagination since the mid-'70s till today. So yeah, it's one of the classic comics.
It's a Grail comic. It's easy to overpay for it, because it has so many things in it that are valuable. People who know Dave Cockrum's work from Legion and his excellence with costume designs and character designs, they can get this because of his work. There's that Gil Kane cover, which is beautiful, but it's the first appearances of so many. Now, it's not Wolverine's first appearance. Everybody knows his first appearance was
Incredible Hulk 182, right?
181.
181.
It depends if you subscribe to the first appearance as the actual appearance or the last panel.
Right.
There he is, right? It's 180 and 181. And that's also Len Wein. So this character is really one of the reasons why I was an X-Men fan for so long. I loved the idea that there was a Canadian hero. That was thrilling for me. And I did not buy this until later. But if you give us an overhead real quick, Nick, and you guys can see this, these Marvel Milestone editions, Dave Cockrum's art, it feels like it's influenced by Kirby, but it's a different feel. It's a different vibe. It's a little bit of that Kirby style. He's influenced in his layouts. You see Peter jumping off the panel there. But it's just a different vibe. And what Cockrum was known for, as I say, costumes and character designs, you know, he borrowed some stuff for Aurora. He, I believe, and his wife came up with the idea for Nightcrawler, and that he had velvety fur, Count Dante, of course. Just some really great stuff here from a costume perspective. And the characters themselves, these new characters, have these nice international stories. If you were going to say something about this comic, aside from the fact that you have to get it, it sets the tone for a new feel. And I think you can feel, you read this recently, didn't you, Ryan?
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I didn't know that it was originally planned to be like more of a quarterly. Mm-hmm. I imagine it would have been more fleshed out and a longer story, because reading it, that's probably my only criticism is the pace. Like, and it actually works in its favor because it's so lightning fast. Like you immediately jump in. It's like, oh, the X-Men are gone. We need the original X-Men. I need to put together this team. And then it's like a globe spanning, putting the band together story. And then they go to this island called Krakoa to rescue the original X-Men, but you don't know what happened to them. So you're kind of always playing catch up. And, but whether that was by design or as a result of what you were saying, they actually had to make a shorter story to fit just the giant size book. But it really worked, and it kind of set the tone for, this is something different. It's very modern and fast, and yeah, it's very exciting.
The pace is crazy. The idea of Krakoa being introduced here, I don't think Krakoa came in anywhere else as a living mutant island. And of course, it becomes so important in the last few years. I know you were following that run.
Yeah, for sure. And anyone who's reading the X-Men right now, like Krakoa is like, it's sort of what Hickman used to unite all X-Men and give them, I think he liked the idea. It's probably an idea. Let's give the X-Men and all mutant kind like a home world. And have them separate, like on an island. And then he probably thought, oh, I got a great idea. I'll use Krakoa. And I think a lot of times when a new writer comes out of the X-Men, they like to use the trope of the new Genesis or second Genesis. Like that's Jim Lee's first issue, like in the 90s as well. Use Genesis in the title to come back to this reimagining. It's a clever construct in terms of storytelling, but to a company like Marvel, it's also brilliant because it allows them to remarket themselves, and everybody knows how much number one issues and something new and something novel it sells.
And speaking of reissue, you can get the Marvel Milestone edition of Giant Size X-Men 1, which we've got here. And Ryan, you got another reissue of Giant Size X-Men 1.
Yeah,
that you bought.
I think it came out a year or so ago. These reprint editions. And I have, I could have cheated and just read 181 right off here, to be honest. I don't know why I didn't even think of that. But these are great.
Yeah, and they are.
$5 for the X-Men and $4. But I think these have actually even gone up in the collecting market to about $20, $30 if you can find them now.
They do. But let's go to the next one that you have to grab.
Well, wait. Before you jump off, don't you have a nice slabbed one there?
I have a 6.5 slab here.
Yeah, we got to pull.
Oh, did you want to look and see how I?
Yeah, I want to see how you fared on this.
How did I do with the 6.5 slab?
Wow. Average sale of $1,046 in a range between $478 and $1,795 for a 6.5 there.
Yeah, 6.5 is all over the map. When I bought this, I paid less, but I paid more than I would like to pay. And the only reason that I bought it is for this show. And I don't collect X-Men. As you know, I don't like the title. It didn't create my love for comics. None of that. It was not important to me, and it was not a great.
I'm like, wait a minute. None of this sounds right to me. There it is.
This was the comic I've been wanting my whole life. There are a few grails for me that my whole life I wanted X-Men 181. I wanted Giant Size X-Men 1, and I wanted this one here, X-Men 94. I love this Gil Kane cover. Count Nefaria didn't have a giant role to play in the X-Men story.
I love Storm coming out of his mouth here.
Yeah, it is a strange vibe. But what happens inside 94, you can look up the value of that.
Already there.
It has one of the worst character hairdos and costumes of all time. Look at Banshee's hair.
Oh.
And it's a costume.
And how he's elegantly smoking that pipe.
And he's smoking a pipe. And Dude. This is what started for me my lack of interest in Banshee.
I thought you were going to say pipe smoking.
Catch Lucky, right? It was so ridiculous.
And talk about a price. Holy cow.
For X-Men 94?
Yeah. Highest known value is $26,500.
It seems
wow.
Like
that's going up. That's crazy.
That's back in 2010 though. It's average now. Average grade at 9.0 is $789. Whoever paid that in 2010, I kind of feel like they got ripped off. But
it comes and goes.
Yeah, this one is wow. Talk about range. It kind of goes up and down and up and down.
It's also strange. Don't you find, Ryan, it's not quite as good a story as you would want?
Yeah, like the villain, there are elements you can see of what's going to come. This was like Chris Claremont, first one where he was credited. I think he co-plotted Giant Size.
Yeah, he didn't write this one, apparently. Len wrote this. I believe that the next one that Chris actually wrote was 95. And there's something that he sets in 95 that becomes known. And by the way, I don't have 95. It's on my wish list. But what we see happening in this comic, aside from the idea that Banshee he's got the worst hairdo and the art is okay, you see there's still some goofiness left over. The Ani-Men, like those animal creatures, that is ridiculous. It's very old-fashioned. I feel like they weren't ready for what this was going to be. They didn't know what they had yet, I don't think. I think that comes into 95. And don't you think?
I'll bring in 95.
95's got a great cover. I have a copy of it right here too.
Yeah.
Hold it up a little bit there, Ryan.
I've got it up here on the screen.
Isaac's got it. Let's go with Isaac's there for a second. Another Gil Kane cover. We lose Sunfire. We lose Angel, Iceman, Havoc, Polaris, and Jean Grey.
Yeah, Sunfire right. Can't wait to quit.
We're supposed to. The theory is they're all gone. We're losing Jean Grey. Chris Claremont had different ideas for Jean Grey. Did he ever? And he showed what he was all about because he killed Thunderbird.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was part of a plan. I think that was him saying, this is how we're going to make a statement. And boy, did he make a statement.
It's right on the cover, too, that classic Silver Age. I love those ones like that Flash cover where they're like, stop. Buy this issue, and it says like, not a hoax, not a dream.
Yeah.
This issue, an X-Man dies. You must read War Hunt. You have no option. You must read it.
And the truth is, this is where I got flipped around. I wanted 94 because of the cover, right? I love the cover. The interior, not appealing. 95, I've never had it, but that was one. I remember reading that one and thinking, okay, this is crazy. Because I loved that character. Two issues, I thought, oh, great, we have a native character, and this was really exciting for me. I was obsessed as a kid. I was obsessed with things of native culture. Do you remember Little Big Man? Do you remember there was a kind of a movement that you'd see cowboy movies with a little more native culture. Probably still stereotypical, but I was excited by that. Killing him, I think that's where Chris Claremont let everybody know things were different. Yeah. 96, the next one. Isaac, what's 95 worth right now?
You're talking record price of $1,375. Like a 9.8 is like $990.
What's a raw going for? If you scroll up, you'll give us a raw, I believe.
Raw? Sorry, I went $58. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I have almost bought that one many times, but I never see a copy that I like. And the same has happened with 96. 96 went boom because of Moira McTaggart. It's the first Moira McTaggart. And when she got implemented in this latest situation, we won't spoil for anybody, but she has an amazing power, really, really interesting mutant power. She was brought in 96 for the first time. It's Claremont and Cockrum again. And I think Claremont lets people know right off the bat, he's so creative. He's got so many good ideas. And he brings in Wolverine's Berserker Rage in 96. That's the first one. So that's a must grab. And I have never seen that. You know, I'm not like you. You sometimes, you get your list, Ryan, and you stick to it. You go out and grab them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I usually, like, I'm patient. Like, I'll wait. If you go to your local comic book store, a lot of them will have sales like maybe once or twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
Like Boxing Week, you might have like 25% off or 50% off wall books. And I'll wait and I'll buy a bunch of it all at once. And I know like that copy is like has a $45 price tag on it, but I don't think I paid that for it. Like I probably got it for half of that.
That's why I haven't picked it up. I've seen it for $50 a lot of times.
Yeah, raw is $50. Yeah. I mean, graded 8.5 is $185. Record is $13.95. Yeah.
It's important right now because of what they've done with Moira and the role that she's played in that run that you've read. And I haven't caught up on that run yet. I have them to read, but have not read yet.
It's a confusing cover, don't you think, though?
It's chaotic.
Yeah.
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 A lot of things, and there's a bit of a color tangent going on.
It is a strange thing. I'm not a huge fan of that cover either. On my note, I struggle. I like Dave Cockrum's art. I don't love Dave Cockrum's art. It was the X-Men that pulled me in, but something happens soon that changes our opinion of Dave Cockrum's art. Let's talk about 100, X-Men 100. It's a really classic cover. The X-Men versus the X-Men. Mine's in rough shape. Professor X is standing. When I saw this...
with an arrow. This is Professor X.
This is one of the ones that I bought myself back in the day. When I saw this, I had to have it. I couldn't figure out what was going on. It's got really tricky stuff at the start, a classic situation. But look at this frame.
Amazing.
Really great.
Wow,
and this makes me think of Kirby. This is very Kirby in its layout. And that's where you see Cockrum is old classic stuff. Look at these panels, man.
So good.
Yeah. And what you find out, Wolverine opens up Jean Grey, and she's a robot. That's right. Spoiler alert. Jean Grey is not Jean Grey. And this crazy guy, I can't remember his name, I want to say his name's Paul, and maybe it is. And you'd think I'd do more research. I just remember him as Paul. Which is not a very bad guy name. He created these robots that were supposed to destroy the X-Men. And really, it's not a huge deal. He's not a bad guy that I like and follow later. He does come back into play later. But what happens in 100 that is worthwhile, these are Sentinels, these X-Men robots. And if you were me and you bought the official handbook of the Marvel Universe and you looked at the Hellfire Club in that official handbook of the Marvel Universe, these are not valuable comics. If you look up the official handbooks, Isaac, you'll see they're like $8 for good raws. When they mention the Hellfire Club, they say that Sebastian Shaw paid for these robots. He paid for this bunch of Sentinels in 100. But it's not mentioned here, which is interesting. And you can see Jean Grey in the final panels sacrifices her life? What? What is this force around her, Ryan? She sacrifices her life for the rest of the team, and there's like this fiery force around her.
Heavy. These books are, everybody's dying.
It's almost like
it's like a actual mythological phoenix.
Like
this story beat keeps coming back to life over and over again. But the first time it was very good.
This is when you realize that Chris Claremont, his ideas are really good and they really work.
Yeah.
And this title really starts to sell. Before this, it was really selling. They knew right away that they had a winner. But this is the first fastball special. Wolverine gets picked up by Colossus and thrown.
Oh, that's right.
This has a really great Banshee error where he has to scream to fly and he talks at the same time. That's always fun. I'm not a Banshee fan, as I've made clear. We see Claremont loves the character Jean Grey, almost called her Green Jay. He loves her. He has a plan for her, and that plan is revolutionary. But what also comes up here is this is where you start to sense the soap opera ahead. Would you not say, Ryan, that X-Men becomes one of the most amazing soap operas?
Oh, definitely. And like even that character, I think you were talking about, is it Stephen Lang? I looked up. I have this book about collecting the X-Men, which is actually pretty handy. You missed out that this is also the first appearance of negatubes.
Yeah.
If you're a big fan of Marvel technology, negatubes make their first appearance here.
You're
but
right.
Yeah, the whole Claremont, like he has like an A plot and a B plot and a C, sometimes a D, and he'll tease little bits in there. And these characters that seem like they're nothing, like a year later, suddenly they're a big deal. They're the guy who's been behind everything, and it just makes you want to buy the next issue. I think that's maybe why it was such a commercial success as well.
It was such a drug. And you're telling me that guy's name wasn't Paul? The bad guy was Stephen Lang?
Yeah, it's a Stephen Lang.
I thought it was
and
Paul.
The Sentinels,
Steve!
the Mark II Sentinels. Steve.
But Oscar, you need to have 101, guys. If you buy 100, you got to get 101. Isaac, look up 100 and 101,
it's
please.
It's right here. Here's 101. 100.
100.
I want that so much.
Everybody wants this right now. It went
cover.
up like crazy over the last while. It's the first Phoenix. And yes, Jean Grey sacrificed herself for people who have been in continuity for years and years. Jean Grey didn't come back. Spoiler alert. Phoenix
came back, and this is a little bit more expensive one. The highest grade 2019 was $6,800.
But it's a buy right now. It's going down.
Raw is $389. Yeah.
Yeah, I need to get this one.
Man, this is actually surprising. I actually find this is surprising. We're seeing higher numbers in these issues than we were in the older ones.
That's because of exactly what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, it's the character development.
Chris Claremont was on this title, Isaac, for 17 years. Think about that. In comics, that's not very often that you'll see a creator so stuck to a title for, and I don't mean it in a bad way.
He's cooking with gas. That's what he's doing.
He was doing something that I think revolutionized comics forever, honestly.
Yeah, even the mid-grade stuff, even in the 4s and 5s, you're still like $200, $300. It's an expensive book, even at a low or mid-grade.
I mean, it makes me sad and hurts my feelings. I want it so much, and I should have bought it before it went crazy. And by the way,
I'm right there with you.
People like you and I, we knew that we had to buy it. We've known for years.
But are these going crazy because of the movie adapting the storylines? Is that not?
It's why it started. The movie also is the reason, because it tanked. It's why the title is not worth what it was. It's dropping right now, aside from COVID and all of that. But it's going to come back. You know it will. The character of Jean Grey was served so well, and Phoenix was served so well by Claremont over the years. It's a must-have. You have to have 101. Good cover, too. Let's jump to 107, guys. And now we're about to get to some really, really good stuff. Do you have 107, Ryan? Do you care about this one?
Oh, yeah, I love it. I've got a pretty decent, I'd say mine's like a 7.
The creepy tentacles coming in on this one.
Yours is way better than mine. Mine is also from my old days. Remember, I'm from a small town. It was so hard to get comics back then. You'd be very lucky to get, a few of the title you collected.
I think it's cool that those are like comics you bought in Clinton in the 70s. That's pretty rad.
Yeah, it is rad. This one was also good because it introduced something that was particularly interesting to me. If we go, this is the last Cockrum. Dave Cockrum is leaving. I also, this is a great panel. This is very Cockrum-y. See over here? They look like the Legion of Superheroes, and I used to read Legion as a kid. And this is very Legion of Superheroes-y. The Starjammers, I think, are very...
Totally.
Yeah, the Starjammers are very kind of space opera Legion-y. This feels like a callback to Legion. But look at this character here. Look at Fang. Look at Fang's costume.
The brown Wolvie costume.
Isn't that amazing? And in this episode, issue, Wolverine gets his clothes ripped, of course, like he always does, and he puts on Fang's brown costume later on. Yeah, I know. Look, I beat it up.
Clothes sharing.
I beat it up, you guys. Beat it up. He takes Fang's clothes later. We'll find it. There he is. Here's the panel. Now, this is interesting. The story goes that Dave Cockrum did this as a little bit of a screw you for the next artist, because nobody wants to draw that Fang costume, because it's got a lot of crud on it. So Dave Cockrum's leaving the title. He leaves that costume change for the next artist. And the next artist is all to be the talk, except this first Starjammers introduces Corsair. And we all know who Corsair is going to be.
Are you waiting for me or Isaac to say?
Isaac won't say. It's you that's going to say.
It's Scott's dad. Cyclops' dad. Turns out that he didn't die in that plane crash after all. We should have all seen the obvious thing. He was abducted by aliens and taken to space to become a space pirate.
And if you didn't know that Chris Claremont was writing soap operas for teenage boys, that's when you figured it out.
My favorite part of this whole soap opera is like how Scott figures it out, because they have an adventure together and he sees him and then he sees his reflection. It was in like a twig or something.
Yes.
And so of course there has a mustache, and then this floats by and Scott sees his face with that and he goes, wait a minute. I look just like, could it be? Like, it's amazing.
I love that the way he Jean Phoenix telepathically reads his mind and does this like, you can imagine getting to the end of that and be like, what is that? What? And you can't wait. Like, you go a month. I can't stress enough how
kids don't wait for stuff anymore.
They don't wait for stuff.
I think you had to go 2 months when in the first year of Claremont's run. I think it was only 6 times a year, but they quickly changed it.
I think you might be right. But remember how I get my comics back then. I go to every store in town and scroll the thing. Did this one get the one I want?
Yeah, you're right. It's 107 is it says June, except it says October on the cover.
Yeah, there was a lag.
And then it says on 108 it's December, but it says again, it's December.
So keep that 108 up there for a minute.
Yeah, this is a very risque cover.
It's a Cockrum cover, but it's what's inside that counts. John Byrne. See how cheap you can get 108?
Yeah, average raw value at $17.75.
So here's been the stopper. 108, 109 are on my wish lists. Why haven't I got them? I keep wrestling with slabbed or best possible raw. I don't know what to do.
Oh, come on. You got to get slabbed of 109 though. I mean, come on. For us?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
I know. Maybe our audience isn't predominantly Canadian, but
109, that cover is amazing for Canadian kids.
Yeah.
You need 108 and 109. John Byrne. Now, for people who know John Byrne's career, John Byrne has been amazing. John Byrne was a writer. He was a plotter later on this title. But when John Byrne came to the XMen, it was revolutionary for people like me. It changed how I thought about comics. John Byrne's art, to this day, when I look at these titles, I can't believe how good the art is and how it holds up for me. And it's a lot about inkers too with John Byrne. His line is so, I don't want to say it's refined or delicate or whatever. He seems to have a little bit of Neil Adams, don't you think, Ryan?
Oh, 100%. I was actually just going to say, when him coming to this book is like when Neil Adams came to the X-Men before the hiatus.
Yeah.
And that clean line, it fit. It's kind of funny because I think I don't know if we're going to talk about this a little bit, but he didn't really get along or see eye to eye with Claremont in terms of the direction of the book, to put it mildly.
Or everybody, apparently. He was
Yeah.
always known to be pretty grumpy, or that's the story.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
like on the page, it's just very sophisticated, and it matched perfectly. And even though he hated doing, apparently he wanted to be all about the fight scenes and Wolverine and that kind of stuff, where Claremont's like, let's just have everybody wearing jeans and t-shirts and talk about our feelings, and with giant word balloons, so there's no room for the art. But as much as he hated drawing those parts, he did it so well. His expressions of the character, the way the anatomy, the way people were standing and interacting. Great storyteller, like great cartoonist.
Tell us what 108 and 109 are worth while we...
108 is actually, like we were saying earlier, 17. It's like raw value is pretty reasonable. 109 is a little bit more. Raw value is like 69, 86, and highest known in 2018 was $1,200. So yeah, I mean it's hit and miss here between in the mid to low grades. It's like $20, $50, $100 at most. And the high end, it's between 300 and 1,000.
They're must-gets. There are callbacks to GS1 in here. The Canadian government comes back to claim Wolverine. You have Weapon Alpha. And I think this may be the first
Is that who this character is at the front?
Yeah, he's Weapon Alpha in this title. He changes his name later. There's a reference here to Charles and Moira having a romantic past, something that is so Claremont.
He's very Captain Canuck, isn't he?
How dare you say that?
I know, but it looks
like
it.
How dare you say that?
I thought for a minute, oh, cool. It's an interesting take on Canuck's costume, but
listen, John Byrne would know about Captain Canuck. There may be some on purpose there. Mm-hmm. The Weapon X program, the Weapon Alpha stuff probably was Byrne had a handle on that. Like, I think he was a big part of Wolverine and Wolverine's backstory and developing Wolverine. So, I mean, you would have, did I say Claremont? I meant Byrne. Did I say it backwards? See, because I'm trying to say this properly. I think Chris Claremont was less about Wolverine than John Byrne was about Wolverine at first.
Totally.
And John Byrne really layered a lot of the plot stuff that we love about Wolverine, I think was a lot about John Byrne.
And forgive me for harping on this a little bit, but I find this fascinating only because this cover is so blatantly obvious when it comes to the Canadian heritage of the Wolverine character. But would you say that they're dwelling on it here? They're showing us here, like this is obviously the Canadian government's coming back to this character. Did they? I don't even think they mentioned it in the movies. Did they? Like nowadays, there's sort of this underdog thing that Canadians always come at pop culture with. That if Canada is mentioned in something, we're like, whoa, oh my God, we exist. Validated. But the thing is that, am I correct in thinking that there's less of it now than there was maybe back then? Because I don't think you would see this in a comic now.
I think it was important back then. It's less important now, but it is part of comics now. Like the idea that things would be Canadian, that still happens. Of course.
Sure. But I mean, like I'm thinking just Hollywood going numbers. No, we're not going to have Canadian.
I know why you're saying that.
Yeah, but we experience it all the time, right? And so we're not going to acknowledge Wolverine being a Canadian character in the movie because that they believe anyway that would reduce sales. Because why would we want to go? Why would Americans want to go?
Oh, yeah, maybe
we're 10% of their population. If it's a numbers game, we lose.
That's right, and we tend to.
But 109, that great cover. That's a Cockrum cover. It's a must-have. It's the soap opera. It's the Wolverine backstory being teased. It's the Charles Moira relationship. And it's Scott saying, Jean Grey's different now. Something's up with Jean Grey. Scratches his chin.
Mm-hmm.
These, to me, come together so nicely, these little threads that we teased out in what I'm thinking will be the last one we'll talk about in this episode. It's 120. And we'll pull 120 up. And this, I did not buy this as a kid. I would have obviously bought it because look at, they actually say Canada.
Chaos in Canada. This is very chaotic.
Yeah, as I would have said probably as a child, Chouse in Canada. I wouldn't have said Chouse the year this came out. This cover is awesome. It's Bob Budiansky. And it's a kind of thing you would take to Bob Budiansky at a con and you'd get him to sign it. But when you look at the first page, guys, it's Justin's dad.
Yeah,
Look at that face. They don't say his name.
It's definitely
It's
Trudeau.
so Pierre Trudeau. It's amazing.
Amazing.
I love it. Just you look at Burns' panels in this. Oh my God. He draws so many good characters. I love the way he does Wolverine in this. It's got Kirby style action panels. It's got the acting that you were talking about, Ryan. He's made Banshee look all right.
Yeah, give him a bit of a smaller, more reasonable looking pipe.
Look where they are in this panel.
Nice.
Holy cow.
Toronto.
Yeah.
So, there we go. As a kid seeing this, I'm in grade 9. I am loving this. I'm loving everything about the X-Men. This is when, for me, you've got X-Men, you've got Japan, you've got this kind of reference to a new team, Alpha Flight. You got Sasquatch grabbing Wolverine, who's talking about his love relationships. Like, it's so soap opera-y. It's got so many pieces in it. It's maybe maybe the first reference to Wolverine as Logan. He tells Mariko his name is Logan. Is this the first time that happens, I think?
It might be, yeah. I don't have this comic, and I've wanted it for a long time. And I've done that stupid thing that you do sometimes as a comic book collector if you're looking for a bargain. And what I've seen it for, and have thought in the past that it's too expensive, I would now gladly pay. So I screwed myself a little bit.
The Trudeau stuff is awesome. The Toronto stuff is awesome. I think you get the roadmap is probably set before this, but for me, the pieces have really lined up for the stuff that we love the most about the X-Men, about Wolverine. John Burns, I mean, it sounds gross to say this, but I love his female characters. Is that skeevy to say? But I love their faces. I think their faces are so bright and so beautiful. He does a beautiful job with Wolverine. I mean, there's a little bit of race weirdness when he does Japanese characters, but I just love the way he captures Japan, even just subtly, and in the ones prior to this as well. But really, in 120, it all comes together. You have to get this, Ryan. Mine is in pretty good shape.
I'm curious, Ryan. What did you think? What did you miss? Like, in terms of the price, you said you saw it for stuff that was, or prices that was too high. Because we're like, average is between $50 and $100.
Well,
I think I saw it for 40 and didn't pay it. Like, I'm just trying to buy one because I want to read them multiple times.
Sure.
So I collect it, but I'm looking for like a 5 or a 6. Ideally like a 6 to 8 if I can get it. So so
50 to 100 in there is pretty average. Yeah.
I think the last time I saw it was like 75.
So it's an attainable title in that $50 to $100 range for sure.
Just look at that. It's down in sales. So over the last while.
Yeah. All these, to be fair, all the titles we've looked at tonight are down.
I know.
But it's just now. That's unfortunately that number we're seeing consistently is just when it's dating this moment. That's for sure.
Well, I do want to say a few things to wind up. John Burns' work, when I think about the X-Men that I love the most, that run, I don't remember how many. Do you remember his last one that he was on, his last issue? I almost said episode. I can't remember. You'd think I'd Google that and have that prepared, Ryan. I did not.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head. I can quickly figure it out by looking at this book.
Don't worry about it. We'll talk about that down the road. I love his art so much. He had a hand in plotting. When he was inked by Terry Austin, I think that Terry Austin inked him well, but I love when he inked himself too, obviously. His storytelling is amazing. His character acting is amazing. I really like what he did. And all the creative tension that could have been there between Chris Claremont and John Byrne, I think, was net plus to this whole series. Don't you think?
I agree 100%. The variety of his drawing, like the way he draws people, how they look different, and they all have characters, and they wear different clothes. It's just a whole elevation of the comic book art. I just looked it up. So he draws all of like the Dark Phoenix saga, which were coming up too, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's like a couple of sort of filler one-shot issues, I think, and then immediately, like I think it's 3 issues after Dark Phoenix ends, Days of Future Past he does, which is only a 2-issue story arc, and it's such an incredible one that's had such impact.
Amazing.
And then he does one final issue, which is that weird Christmas issue with Kitty, and then that's his last one. So 143.
I really like that issue. The Christmas.
It's a great issue.
Yeah.
It's really and it's charming, and it shows how good he is at that those moments. Like and then the side of him, like he can draw, and there's like a humor in there, like that's part of his skill set as well.
This run that we just talked about, some of the keys, goes from about February 75 to what is it? End of 79
or April 79?
April 79. Yeah. So midway through or early in 79. What an amazing time to be trying to find comics, to be reading comics. Like Jaws comes out in 75, Star Wars comes out a few years later. I mean, think about the giant things that were happening in pop culture. Alien, Apocalypse Now. This is a crazy time period. You have movies and you have music. The Cars first album comes out in 78. You have punk music. Like you have stuff happening during this time period. For me personally, that was absolutely baseline for the way my brain works. And for comics to be able to come out in that chaotic time period. Jimmy Carter's the president. I think he appears in one of these, actually. He has a cameo like Pierre Trudeau's face. But you have a world where there is so much happening, and these comics were able to distill a lot of the energy of that time period. And somehow these young creators, Cockrum was not necessarily a young creator by then, but you have Chris Claremont, you have Len Wein, you have Roy Thomas, you have Dave Cockrum, you have the old master Gil Kane coming in for covers, and then you have the brilliance of John Byrne working with Claremont. This is just a run that has to be picked up. It's probably ending during, I've always said to this, Isaac, Ryan, you don't know this, but Isaac knows, I always say 1979 is the best year. That song by the Smashing Pumpkins, obviously other people agree with me, but for me, 79 was amazing. And you pick up this 120 and it takes you right back. I did buy all the Alpha Flights, by the way. I was there for it. I was in. It was such an amazing run. I can't stress enough how critical these are, and became so important for Marvel, I think, for years and years and years to come.
Well, even now, there's stuff coming out of this still, right? So this time period.
I don't know who. It might have been Louise Simonson. There's a writer who said if she was ever running out of story ideas, she would go through stuff that Claremont had set up, because he had set up so many things. Like if you were in trouble, you could go back through what he had built and there would be something available that you could put together. And just, he had thought so far ahead for so many. And by the way, even if people retconned it, he really did lay the groundwork for all kinds of stuff, didn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. He's like a natural storyteller, and you could tell that it wasn't a job. He cared so much about it, and does to this day. Like I have a story. I met him a few times at cons, and last year I was with my daughter. She was 14, and at the time, and she got him to sign the first Excalibur comic. He asked her. He just thought that he goes, "Who's your favorite character?" And she said Kitty Pryde. And then he goes, "Do you want to know the secret future history of Kitty Pryde?" And then I sat there like a little kid while he went on for about 10 minutes and made up this story about how she lives to the heat death of the universe, and after the XMen, she becomes president of the United States. And and he's telling this story like off the top of his head. It was amazing, and I just thought, like, wow, what a great guy! Like, and I thanked him for all these great stories he's told over the years. But you can see that it's a labor of love, and that he has that passion for it, and it translates directly onto the page.
He's one of those guys. Some people can meet him and he can come off a little grumpy. John Byrne has a reputation for being grumpy, but they've earned the right to be grumpy. They've built our lives in some ways from a story perspective and the comics that we love so much. Listen, guys, I think we better go. Isaac is falling asleep. He was up at 4 this morning.
It's a long day. I'm sorry I've been so quiet this episode.
I was blabbing a lot because this is
your jam right now.
This is when my X-Men came around. Ryan Buckley, thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime.
Have fun in the danger room. Are you going to wheel back and show us your thing on the way out, your little cosplay you can do? Isaac Elliott Fisher. Oh, wow.
Oh, he disappeared there. Did the wheel right back. There you go. Take your hat off.
Take the hat.
There you go.
There it is.
There it
To
is.
me, my X-Men.
That's
good.
It's
Ridiculous.
always nice
You're making
to
me
end.
do that.
It's bad of me, but it's also delightful.
That's very funny.
Thank you so much. This was episode 4 of Key Issue. Remember, check out Covrprice, Covrprice.com, and check us out, Definitive Film, and see what we're doing next. And stay tuned for episode 5 coming up soon.